Welcome to Blind Spots, a podcast where we're helping you fill the gap between what you want to do with your money and what you actually do. We are professional investors, writers, and financial planners helping you navigate the complexities of finance to optimize what you can control and cut out the rest. Join your host, Nick Shermans and Aaron Varghese, as we discuss the questions and nuances surrounding everyday money management. Back in the hot seat. Hello, everyone, and welcome back to another episode of Blind Spot. Feels like I haven't done this in a while, but I'm excited to be back. So in today's episode of Blind Spots, we are going to be talking all about how to make decisions, tangible ways to make decisions, because in conversations that I have had with clients recently, there's a lot of noise, a lot of things going on, and I feel like people are just bogged down by decisions and decision fatigue. So we wanted to just chat through how to make decisions in today's episode.
Tell us where you were, Aaron.
I was gallivanting on the other side of the world in Thailand. It's a beautiful country.
What were your top 3 takeaways from your Thailand visit?
Top 3 takeaways. Can't discount the food. The food is great. Have to shout that out. The culture is really beautiful. Everyone is very welcoming and seems like they're happy to be with you and to serve you no matter where you are. Like even their physical posture when they welcome you in, it's kind of this like bow. And it was kind of interesting comparing that to being in Europe several months ago, where it's very much so kind of the opposite, where they seem to hate tourism and very blunt and just a different kind of tone. So that was an interesting comparison between the two cultures. So the culture is very beautiful. Everyone there is lovely. And I think just new experiences and kind of creating adventure in life is really important and something that I will always try to do. So those are my takeaways.
Lesson for all of us.
Mm-hmm.
Great. Well, it's good to have you back. It's great to be back in the podcast hot seat, as you put it.
Yeah.
Today, we're going to try to simplify decision points to help you make clear decisions. And I'm big on process. I talked about process to our team, and I think many decisions can be simplified by outlining several things that are important to you. So we're going to highlight 3, and we're going to use some personal stories, some client case studies to help you make better decisions. So Aaron, what are we going to start with first?
Let's start with identifying the game that you are playing. So this is your example.
Right. And I feel like people make decisions without a holy grail or a holy apex that they're working towards. And the example that I use, and maybe I've used this before, but my overarching goal when talking about money is to answer to nobody. So I view money as a tool to take control of my schedule, my time. I want to be able to do what I want to do with who I want to do it with when I want. That's my overarching goal. So every decision that I make or I'm faced with, I look through it with the lens of answering to nobody. And I'll give you an example. I drive a 2013 Ford Fusion Hybrid. It's been a great car, hasn't broken down. It's got a huge dent in the back of it, like the back driver's side door. It's got a broken up windshield, and all my golf buddies and friends just give me crap about it. And sure, I like cars. I like fast cars and shiny cars and new cars. But I realize if I buy the car I want, an Audi RS5, which is very expensive, I'm going to be further away from my goal of answering to nobody. Therefore, it's an easy decision for me. If I buy the car, I'm further away from my goal. I don't want to do that. So I drive the Fusion, and I take all the verbal assaults and all that stuff. But the point is by identifying the game that I'm playing, I'm able to easily filter through these potentially complex decisions, resist my urge, resist the human tendency for instant gratification, because I'm very, very clear about my overarching goal. So the point is, when you're faced with a decision, ask yourself, have you and your spouse, or have you as the head of your household clearly identified the game that you're playing?
In what other areas have you been able to use that mental check? Because I think that's a good kind of quick pull it up. If you're faced with two decisions, you can say, what's my goal? So what other areas have you used that in?
So I don't know if this is going to answer your question, but I have several friends in the last couple of years that have built brand new houses, very nice houses, multi-million dollar homes. And there's a bit of FOMO, not so much with me, but my wife. Like we bought a house in 2018. It's in Camas. It was built in 2005. It's a nice house, but I have 3 kids. I've got a dog. It's starting to show some wear and tear. And she's expressed her desire to either do a remodel or buy or build a new house. And again, I go back to the conversation. It's like, honey, that would be great. But again, you're basically sentencing me to many more years of work. And again, if we did all this stuff, we'd be further away from our goal of answering to nobody. So again, just by being very clear, she's like, oh yeah, you're right. So by being on the same page, by having these conversations with my wife, yeah, we can flirt with various things that we would want to have happen, but our overarching goals drive our decisions.
It's a perfect example. So the next time you're faced with a decision, think, does this align with my goals?
Yeah, and I feel like many people throw out goals. Like I always say this, winners and losers have the same goals.
Yeah.
Right? Everyone wants to win.
Right.
What's different between a winner and a loser is the process, the systems in place.
The behaviors.
Yes, the daily behaviors. Goals are just talk, right? It's fine to have goals. A clear example is when everyone is at the gym on January 1st or January 2nd of the new year, fast forward to March and the gym's empty. Well, it's empty because they all had the same goals, very different behaviors and habits and decisions that don't necessarily align with their fitness goal. And that's why the gym's empty. So anytime you're faced with a decision, make sure you have an overarching goal, but also make sure your habits, your behaviors, and everything else aligns with that goal. Otherwise, it's just empty talk.
This is a sidebar that you just made me think of, kind of New Year's resolutions. Something that I don't think I have ever experienced before, and this is completely unrelated to the podcast topic, but something I thought that was interesting. I think it was the first week of January. We met up with some friends at a popular brewery downtown, and it's always booked, always super full, can't get a table or reservation for a large group. So we come in on, I think it was like a Friday night, first week of January, and it is completely dead. And so we asked the server, like, where is everyone? Why is nobody here? This place is always packed. And she said that every first, usually couple weeks of January, nobody comes in because they're trying to be healthy. People are doing dry January. They're not drinking, so they're not going out. And I just thought it was really fascinating that it was completely empty. But anyways, that just made me think of that.
Well, and then what happens? They get a random burst of inspiration and they do the right thing in their eyes. And then fast forward a couple months later and they're back necking 5 beers on a Wednesday. So systems, process, and habits make sure they're consistent with what you say is important to you.
Okay. Number 2 is weighing all of your financial decisions and running the numbers. So when we're talking about making a financial decision, you have to actually crunch the numbers and make sure that it works, because it's not all Candyland and sunshine and rainbows. You can want a lot of things, but the numbers also have to work out too.
Well, and Aaron, what are some examples of you doing this for clients? Like one popular one that comes to mind, and then I'll let you talk about it, is when people ask the Social Security question, when should I take my benefits? And oftentimes we see people trying to make that decision just in a silo, just focusing in on that very question without how that affects the rest of their financial plan. So why don't you talk about that?
Yeah, well, you stole my thunder a little bit on the Social Security topic, because that's probably the number one question that we get, that we run. So that's probably the biggest one. But another example that kind of bleeds into our third point is we recently had a client who was weighing the options of either renting out their second home or just selling that home. And so we, of course, ran the numbers. We wanted to see what the tax implications of selling the home would be, because they've owned it for a long time. Pretty large capital gains potentially. We also ran the numbers of what renting would look like. How much would they have to pay to a property management company if they wanted to go that route? How much rent would they actually get? But one of the largest factors that they didn't consider is the actual maintenance of the home over the next 20, 30 years of their lifetime. And that, like I said, kind of bleeds into our next point of looking at the soft stuff, because when we crunch the numbers, it really didn't make an impact on their financial plan of whether they sold the home and got a lump sum of cash or they had renters and got rental income. Their plan was still going to work either way. They didn't rely on one decision or the other in order to make their plan work and to kind of fulfill their lifestyle. So after we made that kind of definitive decision that one decision or the other didn't really make a difference, we moved on to the soft stuff of, I just asked the question, okay, well, if you have renters, you're going to be a landlord. Do you want to be a landlord? And they had a pretty easy answer. And the answer was no. We're in our 70s. We're kind of winding down. We don't need the rental income. And the risks that come with being a landlord just really don't outweigh the benefits. So that's just an example of crunching the numbers. Does it work out or not? Yes or no? And then if yes, does it make sense on the back end?
So we're on point number 2. What was our point? Because we kind of lost that.
So point number 2 was crunching the numbers, actually making the numbers work or ensuring that the numbers work.
So it's make sure that you understand the blocking and tackling if it works in your financial plan. I think that's table stakes. I think most people understand that. What gets discounted is what truly makes you happy. And I think your example of talking about the client and running the numbers and showing them it didn't really make a difference between selling or renting, but what do you want to be doing on Tuesday at 10 a.m.? Fielding a call from a tenant about a broken toilet or going to your beach house and enjoying your grandkids. Framed in that context is an easy decision. So while it's important to run the numbers, it's important to understand if it works or it doesn't work. Do not discount your own personal happiness. What frustrates you? What makes you happy? Most people would be better off, especially as they age and get older, to err on the side of simplicity. Go the path of least resistance. Simplify your life. Because one of the biggest worries that we get from a head of household that runs all the money, right, that makes all the money decisions, is I'm worried about my spouse not being able to take this over from me. Okay. Why in the hell would you make it so complex? God forbid you passed away, the money person passes away, and your spouse is left with this labyrinth, this maze to unwind, which makes an already stressful time even more stressful. So don't discount the soft stuff. Do what makes you happy with an eye on simplicity.
Yeah, I think that simplicity is overlooked. And we've talked about this before, that if it's more complex, it's better. We talked about that in a few different contexts. But I think especially when you're thinking about your own personal finances, especially as you age or especially as you get into retirement, simplicity is a good thing.
People mistake complexity with a sophisticated solution. I would say the opposite. I would say true sophistication and genius is making complex simple. But most people go the other way, which is fine if you're working, which is fine if you have 40 years ahead of you and you're making a lot of money and you're in risk-seeking, wealth-seeking mode. But I've seen that unwind and derail so many plans by people who cannot turn it off and be content with what they have. They just keep perpetually doing stuff. And oftentimes it goes back to my first point. It just goes back to not being able to clearly define the game that you're playing, right? They're taking information from all these different sources and they're bundling it together and they're trying to make decisions without context of what truly is important, the game that they're playing and what makes them happy.
Yeah, I think it's an underrated skill.
And know that what makes you happy has nothing to do with the stock market is doing. It has nothing to do with the housing market. It has nothing to do with interest rates. Maybe you can talk about your current journey as it pertains to buying a home.
Yeah, it's been a fun and interesting journey if you are a first-time home buyer or you know a first-time home buyer. It's not a fun or easy decision. And you can say especially now, but there's always been a time where it's especially now, it's always, whatever.
Yeah, so there's
But
always something to worry about is what you're saying.
yeah, there's always something to worry about. The generation currently always says that this is the worst it's ever been. So in our journey to become homeowners, we have kind of used some of these examples that we've talked about today to help make the decision if we should move forward or not, because there are a lot of people that we have talked to that, this podcast is called Blind Spots, that have different just personal experiences that shape the way that they view the world. So a lot of people that we know have purchased homes in the last 10, 15 years. And of course, they've done great. Buying a home has been a wonderful decision. So we have had to try to make our own objective decision to ensure that it makes sense for us now and in the future. So we've gone through a lot of these. So I guess I'll just run through our 4 points and apply that to my own situation. So identifying the game that you're playing, align your behaviors with the things that you want. So I guess for us, this would be, what do we want to accomplish in the next 5 or 10 years? What do we want life to look like? And how does having a home help us achieve those goals? In the same way, when you are working and saving for a home, you have to make decisions that also align with that. So that's the first one. 2, weighing all the financial decisions, running the numbers. Like you said, that's kind of table stakes. You have to know what your mortgage is going to cost. More than that, you also have to know the other costs associated with buying a home, not just things like closing costs, but, your electricity and everything else is more expensive.
HOA,
Maintenance on a home is more
yeah.
expensive. There's a lot more to owning a home than just your mortgage, just principal and interest. So weighing financial decisions, that was, of course, number 1. And then for us, most of all, it was, I think, coming to the decision to move forward in purchasing a home is not discounting what makes you happy, the things that we want to accomplish, where we want to be in the next several years. But it's a lot of the stuff that makes you happy. So it's weighing both of those. And my husband and I actually put together a list of pros and cons. What does having a house give us, and what are we potentially giving up or sacrificing by having a home or purchasing a home now? So that's point number 3. And then point number 4 is to simplify. So I don't know exactly how this applies to us, but I guess more of the context of not making the decision too complicated. There's a lot of noise, a lot of voices, a lot of opinions, and kind of refocusing again back to what our own goals are and just making the decision that's best for us. And like you said, with the information that you have today. So that's how I've applied that to my own life.
Yeah, and your social circle, what you read online, is probably heavily loaded with information about the opposite of the soft stuff, like the hard numbers, the cost versus owning versus renting, the ongoing home maintenance. Like it's littered with that, littered with opinions on what you should do next, what rates are going to do, what home prices in each market are going to do.
Yeah.
I think you have to be careful with all that stuff because you can overweight things you cannot control, external factors like that, and discount what truly makes you happy. So before we started recording, I shared with Erin, because I was once in her shoes, that when I bought my first house, I was 24. I had lived in a fraternity for 4 years, and then I moved out with some of my college buddies and shared a townhome. At 24, at 25, I started my career. I started dating. I was ready to have my own stuff. I was ready to have my own place. This was on the doorstep of the financial crisis. So my life dictated what I did next as opposed to external factors. Turned out to be, I was probably the worst time to buy ever, but I didn't care. I was happy. And eventually the price of my home, the value of my home came back. And then once I got married, once I started to have kids, I didn't care what the Fed was doing. I didn't care what the market was doing. I didn't care what the economy was doing. I bought a house because I started to have a family. I had a wife. I had kids that needed a yard. That's what drove my decisions, my personal circumstance, what made me happy. I didn't care what everyone else was saying. And I think in general, people would do better, or at least make better decisions and more clear decisions, if they had a clear framework on what game they're playing and what truly makes them happy, with a heavy dose of life circumstance and less about the outside external factors that you cannot control.
Definitely. I think that's a good life lesson for no matter what stage of the game you are at. I think that's a good place to wrap it up. We've talked a lot about decisions today. So if you are facing a life decision, run through some of these points, identify the game that you're playing, of course, weigh the financial cost of it, but don't discount what makes you happy, and simplify. Thanks for listening to this episode of Blind Spots. We will see you in the next one.